Boker Tov, everybody. Good morning and welcome back to our morning class, 9:30 in the morning, learning Chassidut. Now we're doing Pirkei Avot according to Chassidut, and especially now that it's after Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, so our learning should have an extra koach, an extra measure of energy to help us learn more Torah, especially when we learn Torah together. And of course, thank you for joining us last night when we had our Tuesday night class, and you're welcome to join us every week, every Tuesday evening. Thank you to Mordechai and Raya for hosting the special edition of the Pirkei Avot according to the teachings of Chassidut. Right now, we're up to Perek Rishon, Mishna Yud Gimel, the first chapter, Mishna 13. In Mishna 12, we learned about Hillel. And in this Mishnah, we continue to learn about Hillel. Hu haya omer, he used to say, referring to Hillel. This Mishnah is in Aramaic. Nigad Shema, someone whose name becomes very boastful and very famous in a boastful way. Avad Shemei, his name will be lost. In other words, a person should not be boastful. Rather, a person should be careful in being humble. Next part of the Mishnah, Udala Mosif, and if someone does not add on his Torah learning, he just suffices with the Torah learning that he's done up until then, Yasef. Basically, he will forget his learning. And there are some that explain that God forbid, Hashem Yirachem, he may pass away before his time. Udala Yalif, and someone who does not teach Torah, Ketala Chayev, he is obligated to die. It's a very harsh statement. Udiyishtamish betaga chalaf, and someone that uses a tag, the Torah, the little crown on top. In other words, this is according to one of the interpretations, that a person that uses the Torah for their own benefit, for their own pride, chalaf, he will be lost, he will be gone, and he won't have a portion of the world to come. So this Mishnah is a very harsh Mishnah. The point of the Mishnah is that we need to learn Torah. We need to always add in learning Torah. We need to teach Torah, and we cannot use Torah for our own benefit. We have to make sure that we are always humble. So the first thing that we want to explain is, how come when it says in the second statement, someone who does not add in Torah gets lost, but it doesn't say that they are obligated to be killed? When it comes to Udala Yalif, someone that does not teach, Ketala Chayev, they're obligated to be killed. What's the difference between the two? And so the Rebbe explains that when it comes to adding in Torah, there is not this idea of reward and punishment. It's just an automatic outcome of what's happened. So when a person adds a learning Torah, then automatically he adds life. Because Torah is chayenu v'orech yameinu, is our life and the length of our days. The more we learn Torah, the longer we live. Be'ezrat Hashem. The same thing is in the opposite. When a person does not add in learning Torah, God forbid, then naturally that brings the opposite of life. But a person might say that maybe it's enough for him to learn to add in learning Torah, and then he'll have a lot of life. But to teach other people, maybe he's not obligated. We have an obligation to learn Torah ourselves. But how about teaching other people? Therefore, the Mishnah continues and says, udala yalif, and someone does not teach. So it's not just an outcome of what he's done. The opposite of life. Even though, naturally speaking, it should be added to him in life, because he does add in learning Torah, nevertheless, he receives a punishment, God forbid. The Gemara learns that a Talmud Chacham, a Torah scholar, that has reached the level of teaching and does not teach, is a very severe thing. And therefore, the person, Chalila, gets a punishment that he should, God forbid, be missing in life. Now let's move on to another point in this Mishnah. The question is, why is this Mishnah written in Aramaic? There may be one other Mishnah in the end of Perek Hamishi, the end of chapter 5, which is written in Aramaic. So why is this Mishnah specifically written in Aramaic and not written in Lashon HaKodesh like the rest of Pirkei Avot and most of the Mishnah in general? So the explanation is as follows. Hillel, who he is the one who said this Mishnah, he came from Babylon, and therefore he was called Hillel HaBavli. So the Talmud tells us the story of him being appointed to be the Nasi, to be the leader of Am Yisroel here in Eretz Yisrael. One time, the 14th of Nisan came on Shabbos. Erev Pesach fell out on Shabbos. And they did not remember if the Korban Pesach, if the Pesach offering pushes away Shabbos. In other words, if we bring the offering even though it's Shabbos, in love or not, or maybe because it's Shabbos, we do not do the Pesach Sheni, the Korban Pesach, sorry. The Pesach offering, Pesach Rishon, in the month of Nisan. So they said amongst themselves in Yeshiva, there is one person who just arrived from Babylon, and his name is Hillel HaBavli, and he served the two greatest individuals of the generation, as we learned earlier, whose names are Shmaya and Avtalion. And he will know the answer to this question. So when they called Hillel, he told them the halacha. And miyad, immediately, they appointed him to be the head and the leader of Am Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael. Unfortunately, afterwards, he sort of ridiculed the children of Beseira, that they forgot they were the leaders before he came, and they forgot the halacha. So the Talmud says, Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, whoever shows himself to be a little bit of an ego, if he is a chacham, if he is a Torah scholar, his wisdom will go away. And that's what happened to Hillel. After he ridiculed the Bnei B'Teira, they asked him a specific halacha, and he did not know the answer. He said, I heard this halacha, but I do not remember what the halacha is. So we see two opposite things by Hillel. On one hand, he knew the Torah perfectly to the extent that they appointed him to be the Nasi, which in order to be the Nasi, you need to have total humility and humbleness. On the other hand, he was a little boastful about Bnei B'Teira. And that's because he came from Babel, he came from Babylon. Babel is from the same word as Balal, as we see in Parashat Noach, where Hashem spread out all the people who were part of the generation of those that went on the tower, tried to wage war against Hashem, so to speak. And Bavel is where Kisham Balal Hashem Sfat Kol Haaretz. That's where Hashem mixed up the languages. No one understood each other. Therefore, by Hillel, there was able to be this balal, this mixture of two opposite things. On one hand, greatness in Torah, and on the other hand, he made the mistake of telling off B'nai B'Tera. Why did this happen to Hillel? Because he was the first statement in the Mishnah that he himself says, Negad Shema, someone whose name becomes great and boastful, Avad Shemei, he loses his name. And therefore Hillel said this specifically in Aramaic, because it's important to remember this point when a person comes from Bavel. In Bavel, you could be mixed up. You could have this whole cholent of mixing different things up, and therefore you could have opposites of acting in the great Torah way and also missing a point of being a little bit too having too much of an ego. And therefore Hillel adds and says, excuse me please, Hillel says, whoever does not add in Torah, he will be missing. What does that mean? Being careful, going away going away from ego and boastfulness can withhold a person from innovating new concepts in the Torah. Therefore, Hillel says, you have to make sure to add in Torah, as it says in Halacha, that every single person needs to make a tikkun for himself and to deal with all four parts of the Torah. Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. Pshat is the literal level, Remez is a hint, Drush is a little deeper like the Medrash, and Sod is a secret. However much you can. Because that's why we're here, because we have the ability to add in Torah, therefore we have to do so. And then Hillel continues and says, whoever does not teach, he's obligated to be killed. For that same reason, that you have to be careful of not being boastful, there's also that concern that a person might refrain from teaching Torah to others. He might say, oh, I don't want to be boastful, so I don't want to teach Torah to others. So Hillel has to tell a person, on one hand, we're not allowed to be boastful. But on the other hand, we have to remember to teach Torah. So teaching Torah does not mean that we will be boastful. It can bring a person to be boastful. But if you teach Torah with the right intention, that you're teaching Torah because it's Hashem's Torah, and in the Hashem's Torah it says that someone that has the ability, and in Hashem's Torah it says that someone that has an ability to teach Torah needs to teach Torah, then a person is not obligated to be killed. Because once the person teaches Torah with humility, then you know that the person has the right intentions of learning Torah. So basically, in summary of this Mishnah, we have to balance a number of things. And it's all mixed up, one big mishkababel, one big cholent. Because the whole concept of being focused and learning Torah, adding in Torah, and teaching Torah has to be in the right way, in the sense that we're not Chalila, we're not, God forbid, overstepping our boundaries. So on one hand, we have to learn Torah, we have to teach Torah, but it cannot bring us to a state of ego. Thank you very much for joining us. B'ezrat Hashem, tomorrow we will continue with the next Mishnah, Mishnah Yud Gimel. Actually, Mishnah Yud Daled. Today we learned Mishnah 13, and tomorrow we're going to learn B'ezrat Hashem Thursday, Mishnah 14, and then on Friday we will learn our Kabbalah Cafe. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day. Be well.